Thank you, Captain Lacey. I am now prepared to answer a few questions.
Sheriff, you indicated on Wednesday that you did not intentionally burn that cabin down to get Mr. Dorner out. You may know I was at the scene that day, and audio we recorded there suggests differently. We heard several officers saying at the beginning of the gun battle, let's burn that cabin down, let's burn that expletive out. Was leading many to believe that that may have been the plan all along.
Yes, sir, I did make that statement on Wednesday at the press conference that we did not intentionally burn that cabin down. I stand by that remark. There is some recordings that I have heard on the news that would suggest that somebody, we have no idea at this point who, made those comments. We are looking into those and we'll deal with those appropriately. I would suggest to you that those comments were made by somebody away from the tactical team. They were not covered over the radio, is my understanding, that they were made by somebody away from the tactical team. The other thing to remember is our deputy sheriffs and the other officers that were present are human beings. They had just been involved in probably one of the most fierce firefights, and sometimes, because we're humans, we say things that may or may not be appropriate. We will look into this and we will deal with it appropriately.
Sheriff, because you said it was such a fierce...
Can you share where his body was found when your investigators went into the first out home?
Sergeant Newport can answer that question.
Mr. Dorner's remains were found in a basement area, which would be the northwest portion of the residence.
Sheriff, you said it was such an intense firefight. Has it been ruled out that both the officer who was killed and the officer who was injured, that it was indeed not friendly fire?
Yes, it has. They were the first two on the scene, and they were standing outside of their vehicle in front of that cabin when Christopher Dorner started shooting from that cabin at our deputy sheriffs.
So they were alone when they first confronted him?
There were other patrol cars pulling up at the same time they were formulating a plan. Our officers had not even pulled their guns out at that point, and were not prepared to engage anybody, and they were ambushed by Christopher Dorner.
Sheriff, was Dorner firing upon your officers with a 50 caliber weapon?
I'm not sure what type of weapon he was firing at our officers with.
Have you recovered it?
We've recovered some weapons that Sergeant Newport talked about already today. I'm not sure at this point if we have enough information to suggest which weapon was used to fire at our deputy sheriff.
Did you recover a 50 caliber weapon from the cabin?
Sergeant Newport?
No, we did not recover a 50 caliber weapon from the cabin.
Sheriff,
there was a gun found.
the tactical team's decision to use pyrotechnic gas, as you mentioned, was there an expectation that that would likely lead to a fire? I mean, there must have been a realization that this was an old wood frame cabin, and that's not uncommon for fires to erupt.
It's my understanding it's not uncommon for fires to erupt, and it's a possibility that they can. So, Captain Herbert can talk more about that specifically.
When the decision was made to deploy the pyrotechnic chemical agent, it was taken into account that there is a byproduct of using that type of device, which are here on the table, can be a fire. Not in all instances do these devices cause a fire. But weighing the situation and trying to get an effective amount of chemical agent into that cabin to try to get Mr. Dorner to surrender, this was our only option. The cold gas did not work. We had to go to the next type of chemical agent in hopes of getting him to surrender.
Captain, do you know how many pyrotechnic grenades were used, sir?
I do, but at this point in the investigation, we're still compiling a lot of numbers and compiling what we've learned from the scene. I'm not prepared to release amounts of devices right now.
Regarding the Dorner
That's
report,
been
Sheriff
today.
Reynolds said that they
Found
never
handgun.
saw any officers coming to their cabins. They never saw any footprints from either officers or even perhaps Christopher Dorner leading to that cabin
That's
where
yours.
he was. Can you respond to that?
Are you talking about the cabin that was in Angeles Oaks, or are you talking about the residences in Big Bear?
Yeah, I'm talking about the residents in Big Bear. The Reynolds said yesterday that they never saw any police officers during any of this search period come by their cabins, and neither did any of their renters see any. What time did your officers and what day did they go by that cabin?
Thursday evening is when the deputy sheriff searched that. We also tied a piece of yellow evidence tape on the corner of that building, which was a marker to our other deputies that we actually checked that. There was nothing discovered there that was unusual, and our deputies continued searching throughout that whole entire complex.
Did you say that's when the door was locked?
Yes, sir. Thursday evening, the door was locked when our
Left it
deputy
unlocked.
sheriffs.
It left it unlocked, so the thinking is that Dorner was inside and then locked it after the Reynolds left it unlocked?
It would appear that that is the case, because when our deputy sheriffs checked it, it was locked, and nobody answered. Thursday evening.
Sheriff, today,
Well,
a
given the fact that
resident,
he was hiding in plain sight, and in his manifesto had indicated that command centers and command posts were rich targets, wouldn't it have given you at least a tactical plan or importance of you scouring that immediate area more thoroughly?
We did scour that area thoroughly. Our deputy sheriffs did a great job checking that neighborhood. Understand, we found the door locked at that condominium. My instructions were that we were not going to kick the doors open to unoccupied residences or ones that were nobody answered. If it was secure and there were no signs of forced entry, we were not going to kick the doors of several cabins or hundreds of cabins open during that search. There was nothing unusual and the door was locked and nobody answered. We continued on to the next target.
Sheriff, today a resident found a gun about a mile away from the burned down cabin with a silencer on it. Can you talk about that? Do you believe that that was used by Christopher Dorner? And if so, how did that get missed?
Sergeant Newport can talk about that.
Okay, as you may know, these investigations are very intense and complicated. We had a lot of area to cover. The night that investigators began the crime scene search, there was over a foot of snow along the roadways. I can tell you metal detectors had been used. Investigators had walked the tracks that we believed Mr. Dorner took, the trail, which took him back out onto the highway. At that time, we did not find that weapon. It wasn't until the sun came out, it started to heat up, the snow started to melt. The snow it was about a few inches thick at that time. The weapon could be seen very, very easily at that time.
So you do believe the weapon found today was another one of his?
I can say that it is very consistent with the weapon systems that he's been using due to the silencer that was found on it, or the suppressor, but I cannot say for sure at this time that it was used by him.
And are these actual weapons recovered from the car, or are these just similar?
There is one on the table that was actually recovered.
Which one is that?
That would be the .308 caliber bolt-action rifle with the sniper scope on it.
The one
So,
standing up?
Sheriff,
Is that the one standing up?
Sheriff, in retrospect,
That is the gun that's got the bipod on it with the scope. That's the gun that
The
was.
one right in the middle?
Yes, ma'am.
Sheriff,
Yes,
in
ma'am.
hindsight, was it a decision that you still would make to not force entry into the cabins in that immediate area?
Absolutely. I'm not
But
going.
Wasn't the public told that a thorough search was done? And doesn't that imply more than just looking to see if a door was locked?
The public was told that a thorough search was done, and I'm thoroughly convinced that our officers did a thorough search of that area. I will not allow the officers to kick doors open that belong to residents that are not home. We have no right to enter those residents regardless of who we're looking for, and I will not allow the officers to force entry into somebody's residence.
Are you going to
Go
release
ahead.
the 911 calls from both the couple and also the person who was carjacked?
We will release that information as the investigation continues. When we have all the information documented, at some point we'll release that
Will you release
information.
the image of the driver's license that was found outside the Garden Flats cabin?
I'll ask Sergeant Newport if there's any evidentiary value for that.
Okay, first of all, obviously you folks know that this is an ongoing investigation. We're still fairly early into the investigation, so there are many things that we don't want to release at this time. Eventually, that may end up being released. Also, I should correct you that that was not found outside. It was actually found on Mr. Dorner's person.
It didn't burn?
No, ma'am.
Captain Herbert, can I ask a question? Have you, you trained with?
Go ahead.
You trained
Go
with pyrotechnic tear gas?
Sheriff,
Go ahead.
Oh, can you give us the timeline about when the search actually began? I mean, when the truck was first reported on fire, when you first suspected that it could be Dorner, and when an actual search began in the mountains of Big Bend?
Shortly before 9 o'clock is when the vehicle was discovered on fire on the Forestry Road. We did not know at that point if in fact it was Dorner's vehicle. It matched the description. Our officers were reluctant to go up to that vehicle, assuming or possibly there was going to be an ambush based on his prior actions. Our deputies stayed back away from the vehicle until the tactical teams arrived and an armored personnel carrier arrived. Once we figured out, in fact, it was Dorner's vehicle, we assembled a team of deputy sheriffs that were locally at the Big Bear area, and we had also ordered additional resources prior to that to come from other areas of the county to begin searching. So in the early afternoon on Thursday is when we started searching for him.
Sure,
Do you think he acted
got
alone?
this
Is
cache
there
of
any
weapons
concern about
to
an
the cabin
accomplice?
where he was staying from the car.
Is there any concern anymore about an accomplice, or as far as, I know you're still compiling evidence, but you did say 2 days ago that the investigation was over, so do you think that he acted alone and that there's no other threat and that there will be no other criminal charges?
The investigation is over as far as San Bernardino County is concerned. There's other investigations going on in other law enforcement jurisdictions, and I will not comment on what the status of their investigations are.
And
Go
New Jersey
ahead.
County got this large cache of weapons,
Is there
I
any,
guess.
was there any Big Bear Lake in the first place?
We have no information as to why he ended up in Big Bear. I'm not sure, and that may come out through the investigation, but at this point, we have no information as to why he ended up in
Are you
Big Bear.
investigating how he obtained his weapons, and might there be any charges against any retailers?
That's all part of the investigation, and I'm not sure what that will result. That also, the other law enforcement agencies that are affected by this are also continuing their investigation, and what they do with it is up to them.
You down the personnel on Monday to about 25. What was the tactical thinking at that point? That he had left, or that he wouldn't have survived the weather conditions?
It could have been either one, that he had left the area or that he was still up on the mountain and couldn't survive the weather conditions. We had no additional information to give us any further leads, but no sightings, nothing to suggest that Mr. Dorner was still there, so we started to scale down our search.
Sheriff, can you talk
looking
about
back
the
at this,
reward,
what would you have
please?
done differently, if anything?
I don't believe that we made any mistakes at this point. There's some comments that were made that we talked about earlier. However, the search itself, our deputy sheriffs performed flawlessly. They worked in those weather conditions on Friday. You saw the footage. It was snowing harder than I've seen it snow. Those deputy sheriffs, both the ones that were searching the residence as well as our SWAT guys, were coming in and out of the command post covered in snow, and there's photos of them to prove it. Those guys were doing their darndest to make sure they found him. They did not give up. They continued working throughout the night, and I'll tell you, if we wouldn't have sent some of them home, they would have stayed until they dropped. These guys are absolutely incredible, and I couldn't be prouder to be a member of this department and support those deputy sheriffs that were out there trying to protect the citizens of Big Bear.
You're getting the sense that you feel that people are criticizing your sheriff's deputies, which I don't think anybody is. The question is, when you have a suspect like this who's military and police trained, if you're not going in buildings, what are the searchers doing? You certainly could have expected her to be out there in plain sight.
We continued to go back through those neighborhoods and search to make sure that we didn't discover any additional cabins that were broken into, doors open, anything to indicate somebody had broken into any residence that wasn't broken into in our previous search. We continued to check, continued to see if there were any leads, any sightings, anything to prove that Mr. Dorner was still in that area.
How did you get
Thank
the
you.
large cache of weapons to the cabin from that burnt-out truck? Did you determine that undetected?
I'd like to thank you all.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, one more time.
Okay, it was a large cache of weapons, clearly a lot for one person to carry. Have you determined how he got from that burnt-out truck to the cabin where he was staying undetected?
I have not. We're still investigating that, and I'm not sure how we got all that stuff to the condo.
So do you think he acted with someone? Do you think there was an accomplice? I know you said there's other agencies working, but what do you think? Do you think he had help?
There is no information to suggest he had any help, but that's all part of the investigation.
Was he able to communicate with anyone through cell phone, or did the reports he made call his mother?
Not that we're aware of. There was no communication that we are aware of. Thank you very much.